November 26, 1926. A factory floor in Herstal, Belgium. The greatest firearms designer who ever lived collapsed at his workbench and died. He was 71 years old. And on the table in front of him sat an unfinished pistol, half-built, half-genius, completely revolutionary. It held 14 rounds, when every other military pistol on Earth held 7 or 8. Nobody knew how to finish it, because John Moses Browning had kept most of the design locked inside his head. What happened next is one of the strangest stories in weapons history. A Nazi occupation, a secret escape through enemy territory, Canadian factory workers, British commandos, and a pistol that somehow ended up arming both sides of the same war. This is the Browning High Power, and almost everything you've heard about it needs a closer look. The whole saga started in 1921, and it started with the French military. France issued a specification for a completely new service pistol, and what they were asking for didn't exist anywhere on Earth. They wanted at least 10 rounds, a 9mm caliber or larger, an effective range of 50 meters, and a total weight under 1 kilogram. Think about what that meant in real terms. A British officer in 1921 carried a Webley revolver, 6 shots. His German counterpart carried a Luger, 8 shots. If both men emptied their weapons in a firefight, the German already had a 33% advantage before anyone reloaded. France didn't just want to close that gap. They wanted a pistol that gave their officers 60% more ammunition than the Germans before touching a reload. No pistol on the planet came close to that number. John Moses Browning saw the opportunity immediately. He'd already designed the legendary 1911 for Colt, but he'd sold those patents and couldn't legally copy his own work. So he started completely from scratch. The breakthrough didn't come from Browning alone. It came from a Belgian engineer at FN named Dieudonné Save. Save invented something that seems obvious now, but had never been successfully built into a military pistol before. A double-stack magazine. Instead of rounds sitting in a single column, Save's design staggered them in 2 columns that merged into one at the top. It nearly doubled the capacity without making the grip significantly larger. The numbers were elegant. A single-stack 9mm magazine could hold 7 or 8 rounds comfortably. Save's staggered design squeezed 14 rounds into a grip only marginally wider. Browning filed his patent in June 1923, built 2 prototypes, then traveled to Belgium repeatedly over the next 3 years to refine the design at FN's facility. He never saw it finished. After Browning's death, Save spent the next 8 years completing the pistol alone. When Colt's 1911 patents finally expired in 1928, he was free to incorporate Browning's earlier innovations. He simplified the barrel mechanism, replacing a complex swinging linky with a shaped cam that was cheaper to make and more reliable in the field. The final design was ready in 1934. FN called it the P-35 and began production in 1935. Then came the bitter irony that nobody talks about. France, the nation that had commissioned this pistol in the first place, rejected it. They chose a domestic pistol series instead. The weapon, built specifically to French specifications, would never serve a single day in the French military. FN named it the Browning High Power, partly to honor the late designer. But the name actually referenced the magazine capacity, not ballistic performance. High power meant high round count. By May 1940, FN had produced around 58,000 pistols, mostly for Belgium and China. Germany invaded on May 10th. The FN factory fell virtually intact just 2 days later. German industrial managers walked into that factory and immediately understood what they had. Production resumed under occupation. The High Power was given a German military designation, Pistole 640, the B indicating Belgian origin. It was issued primarily to Waffen-SS units and Fallschirmjäger paratroopers, elite units, elite weapon. Over the next 4 years, occupied Belgium manufactured over 319,000 high powers for Nazi Germany. Quality declined as the war dragged on. Some late-war pistols had components omitted to speed up production. Belgian workers reportedly sabotaged batches through improper heat treatment, though that's hard to verify from primary sources. But here's the detail that will stick with you. September 1944, Operation Market Garden, Arnhem, Netherlands. British paratroopers of the 1st Airborne Division faced Waffen-SS troops across a bridge. According to accounts from veterans on both sides, both may have been carrying high powers manufactured in the same Belgian factory. Same pistol, same caliber, same magazine capacity, pointed at each other across Dutch River. While Germany was exploiting the captured factory, Dieudonné Save was running for his life. In mid-1941, with help from the Belgian resistance, he fled south through occupied France, through neutral Spain, across to Portugal, then by ship to England. German agents watched every border crossing. Vichy French police checked papers at every checkpoint. The journey took weeks, and Save arrived without complete blueprints. Some drawings had been hidden in Belgium. Others existed only in his memory. At the Royal Small Arms Factory in Cheshire, he began the painstaking work of recreating production specifications from partial documents, a handful of pre-war pistols found in England, and his own recollection of dimensions he had spent a decade perfecting. By June 1943, British engineers had modified his recreated drawings for industrial production. But British factories were already stretched beyond their limits, manufacturing Enfields, Sten guns, and Bren guns around the clock. There was no capacity available for a new pistol. The solution came from Canada. The John Inglis Company of Toronto had nearly collapsed during the Depression. A new owner rebuilt it and won contracts for Bren gun production. By 1943, Inglis was manufacturing 60% of all Bren guns for the entire British Commonwealth. They had the precision engineering capability. They had the workforce. They had the factory space. In April 1943, China requested 182,000 high powers through the Canadian Mutual Aid Plan, including an unusual variant with long-range tangent sights and wooden shoulder stocks. Those optimistic sights were essentially useless for actual pistol shooting. But the Chinese military wanted them anyway. Save and another Belgian engineer traveled to Toronto to assist with tooling and quality control. Production began in February 1944. By October 1945, when production ended, Inglis had manufactured approximately 153,000 high powers, two main variants for China and for Commonwealth forces. Now, about that title, the French resistance and the high power. This is where the history gets complicated. And this channel doesn't cut corners on the evidence. The Special Operations Executive, Britain's organization for supporting resistance movements across occupied Europe, did request around 52,000 Inglis high powers. Approximately 40,000 to 50,000 were delivered to Britain during 1944 and 1945. But where did those pistols actually go? The documented evidence strongly supports that high powers went primarily to SOE agents and Jedburgh teams. Trained Allied operatives dropped into occupied territory to coordinate with local resistance groups. What the evidence does not support is the idea that French resistance fighters were specifically requesting the high power above all other weapons. In June 1944 alone, British aircraft dropped to the French resistance nearly 10,000 Sten guns, over 8,000 pistols of various types, more than 5,000 rifles, over 5,000 M1 carbines, and more than 2,000 Bren guns. The Sten gun, not the pistol, became the weapon inseparably linked to the Maquis. It was cheap, concealable, used the same 9mm ammunition as captured German weapons, could even be built in underground workshops. Pistols were a small fraction of total weapons dropped, and the high power was only one of several types supplied. The story of mass French resistance demand for this specific pistol? That's enthusiast mythology, not documented history. But here's what is documented, and why it genuinely mattered for the operatives who carried it. For an SOE agent working alone behind enemy lines, the high power offered real measurable advantages. 14 rounds versus 6 in a revolver meant more than double the firepower before reloading. In an ambush or a compromised safe house, those extra rounds were the difference between survival and a shallow grave. The 9mm chambering meant an agent could resupply from captured German ammunition, the same cartridge used in German MP-40 submachine guns and Sten guns, scavenge from the enemy, raid their supply depots. The flat profile concealed more easily under civilian clothing than the bulkier American Colt 1911, which also held only 7 rounds of .45 caliber. For an operative expecting to work without resupply, that capacity advantage was decisive. The British regular army stayed stubbornly attached to revolvers throughout the war, and military procurement historians confirm that British leadership held the view that revolvers were sturdier and more accurate than semi-automatics well into the 1950s. The British Army was the last major military force to adopt a semi-automatic service pistol, waiting until 1954, nearly a decade after the war ended. Meanwhile, the units who actually needed modern firepower in combat adopted the high power immediately and enthusiastically. The Special Air Service made it their standard sidearm from World War II all the way through the early 1990s. The 6th Airborne Division was equipped with Inglis pistols by March 1945, in time for Operation Varsity, the largest single-day airborne operation in history, with over 16,500 paratroopers crossing the Rhine. In 1980, the Iranian embassy siege made the high-power world famous when television cameras captured SAS operators carrying them during the rescue operation. In the 1982 Falklands War, British L9A1s faced Argentine FM pistols produced under license. Same design, both sides. Again, more than 50 armies across 93 nations adopted it. The British Armed Forces retained it until 2013. A service life of 59 years. Canada kept theirs until 2024. 80 years of continuous service. SAVE's double-column magazine became the template for every modern combat pistol that followed. The Beretta 92, the CZ-75, the SIG P226, the Glock 17. Every single one descended from the innovation SAVE, developed to meet a French requirement that France itself rejected. FN announced the end of original high-power production in 2018. A modernized version returned in 2022, but with different internals. The original mechanism, refined over decades but fundamentally unchanged since 1935, had finally ended its run. Go back to that workbench in Herstal. November 1926. John Moses Browning, dead at 71. His final design unfinished on the table in front of him. He couldn't have known that a Belgian engineer would spend 8 years finishing his work, then flee Nazi occupation and recreate production drawings from memory in England. He couldn't have known his pistol would arm both sides of a world war, built in the same occupied factory for enemies shooting at each other across European battlefields. He couldn't have known that his 14-round magazine would remain the benchmark for military pistol capacity for the next 5 decades. The high power wasn't dismissed as useless. It wasn't the most requested weapon of the French resistance. Those claims don't survive contact with primary sources. What it was, verified and documented, was the first successful high-capacity military pistol, the template for modern handgun design, and the preferred sidearm of the Special Forces soldiers who understood that in clandestine warfare, ammunition capacity saves lives. Browning died before finishing it. SAVE completed it. Canadian workers built it. British commandos carried it. 93 nations adopted it. The numbers prove it. The documents confirm it. That is not myth. That is verified. If this kind of documented history is what you're here for, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. We read every single one.